Okay, the so-and-so show just talked about a certain topic. They brought it up, and it was about doing. What are they doing in the video here? What are they about to do? Camping. So when we say we are going to do what Jesus says, and we are going to be like Jesus, what does that look like? And I'm going to ask two questions. How do we look like Jesus? How do we do what Jesus says to do? And why do we do what Jesus says to do? So here's what we're going to do. First, to go along with the theme, what are we going to do? Well, I have a 3-year-old daughter. She's almost 3. Her name is Clara, and you may have heard of her if you've heard my teaches before. But when I walk through her room, I see a few things that may be familiar to you. Here, let's just see what I found in her room. And yes, she did give me permission to bring all of this to the stage. Here we go. So I found a grocery store. It's a plate grocery store. It's not the whole thing. You may have one of these at home or seen it in a church nursery before. So that's number one. Number two is I found these. I found some beautiful flowers. And then 3, I found in Clara's room this. Ooh, here we go. I found a dollhouse. How do we do what Jesus says to do? And let's start off with, why do we do what Jesus says to do? Once you have a why, it's much easier to do the actual do. If you don't know why you do something, it's really hard to have that inner, really deep belief of moving forward and doing. If you don't know why would you do? If you don't have a deep belief, why would you do? This grocery store is empty. There is nothing on these shelves. But there's one thing in the drawer to give an example. There's a drawer right here, and what do you think is in a cash register? There are bills in the cash register. These are playbills that come with the grocery store. Why do you think the shelves are all empty? If you own a grocery store, you open a grocery store and you're trying to sell groceries, you have the milk and you have the fruits, you have the cereal, and you don't have a single customer. No one comes to buy the milk, no one comes to buy the cereal, no one comes for bananas for that potassium for the morning run. No one comes. There are no customers. There is nothing in the cash register, and that grocery store goes out of business. Another name for this is currency. Have you ever heard of a river current? Have you ever heard of a river stream? If this isn't flowing, the business isn't going. It's gone. It's done. It's dead. Now try this. Now imagine, you have to use your imagination here, because is this a real flower? It is a very pretty flower. It's a very felt flower, but it's not a real flower. But to use your imagination, let's try. What do you need to raise a beautiful, real flower? Let me think about this. This looks kind of like the color of soil, a very light soil, a very Las Vegas tan, deserty soil. What else do you need to grow a flower? You need water. And what else do you need? Here we go. Let's start talking about photosynthesis, guys. Here we go. You need sun. You need water. You need healthy soil. What happens? Here's the question. What happens if this flower does not have one of those that it desperately, desperately must have to live? And all of a sudden, we have a flower that is no longer an alive, beautiful flower. Let's try one other thing. Now you're really, on this third example, going to have to use a ridiculous amount of imagination. Because this isn't as easy as my letting a flower wilt in my hand or saying there's nothing on the shelves, because that's really obvious. What is this dollhouse standing on right now? It's standing on a stage. The foundation for the home, the foundation for the dollhouse, is a sturdy wooden stage that is designed to hold a lot of weight, a lot of people, a lot of equipment going across the stage. That's what it is designed to do. Now use your imagination here. Ready for all the imagination switches that go on. What happens if this entire stage, right now, below this house and all across, turns into, ready for it? Dry, really dry sand? What would happen? If I were to go like this, would my feet just stop like they currently are with the stage? Or would my foot sink down into the dry sand? Now try it even farther. Take it even farther with your imaginations. What would happen if I took 30,000 gallons of water in a tank above the sand stage? This is all a thick lump of dry sand. And I poured all the water right here. I bet you this dollhouse would be across the room, sliding across, and probably a tumbled mess of wood all over the place with that kind of crushing pressure of the water. The house, the dollhouse, no longer had the sturdy stage. The dollhouse all of a sudden had something that was not made to hold it up, and could not hold it up, and would not hold it up. Just even a light rain would make this slide away. The interesting thing is, some of you may have heard a story like this before. It just so happens in Matthew 7 that Jesus tells a very similar story. Have any of you ever heard this before? There was a wise man who built his house on a rock, and when the rain and winds came, the house stood firm. The house stood. It remained. This was a wise man, Jesus said. A wise man built his house on the rock. You've heard this before in Matthew. I bet you have. Now let's try the opposite example. A foolish man built his house on the sand, and when the wind and rain came, the house was crushed. It was no more, it was in pieces, it fell apart. It was like the stage became that really dry sand, and all of a sudden, the house did not stand. When it's sand, it doesn't stand. Here's something to remember this by. When it's sand, it does not stand. The foundation is not there. So how do we do what Jesus says? We know why now. Without the water, without the sun, the flowers wilt. We are like the flowers in that case. We have a home that is going to be crushed and tumbled up if we don't have the sturdy foundation Jesus was describing. If we don't have the cash flow in the store, the grocery store is no mo. It is not going to exist. It is going out of business. It is gone. What are some other examples of what Jesus said? How do we follow this? We know why. How do we follow it? Here's what I would encourage. Step one. If you don't know what Jesus actually said, you probably can't follow what he said. So I would encourage to open to Jesus' words right here in the Bible and start there. It's not possible to follow what Jesus said if we don't even know what Jesus said. Step one. Let's turn to Matthew 5:8. And many of us probably have some of these verses memorized, but it's good to remember to actually turn into the pages and see them with all the other words around it that Jesus said. It's important to know in context. In other words, around all the other words that Jesus said, what Jesus said. Here we go. Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. What is peace? Let's paint an example. Someone brings in a soccer ball. Let's do this. Let's do this instead. Someone brings in a single skateboard. There are multiple friends. And someone says, I want to use the skateboard. The other one says, I want to use the skateboard. And before long, this group of 3, 4, 5 friends are all fighting over the single one skateboard. What would it look like if you walked up and did exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 5:9? What would this story all of a sudden look like? What happens if you have a soccer ball over to the side and you say, hey guys, this whole thing, 5 of us trying to fight over one skateboard, it doesn't really work. This isn't working. How about we take the soccer ball and go play soccer? And they're like, that's probably a good idea. I wasn't having very much fun fighting anyway. Why don't we try the soccer? All of a sudden you have a game everyone can play, and there's something called peace that can come because of your suggestion, trying to acting out what Jesus encouraged you to do so very long ago in the Sermon on the Mount, when he was teaching his disciples and thousands of others who were listening. And like, wow, who is this? Where did he come from? Is he from Nazareth? Who is this? My goodness, these are amazing teachings. All of a sudden, you can be a peacemaker. Let's try Matthew 5:44. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who hurt you. How many want to immediately raise your hand and say that is one of the easiest things on earth? How many of you want to just raise your hand and say that's one of the easiest things on earth? To love those who hurt you. Not just on accident, but on purpose maybe. How many of you would say that's easy? That's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy to make peace. I'm not saying it's easy to all of a sudden love those who don't love you at all. But the fact of life is, Jesus was talking about real life here. And he was encouraging those who were listening to think differently, to act differently than the rest of the world would naturally, normally act. We, Jesus followers, are being asked to do something different. This is the love of the Father flowing through you, through Jesus' work on the cross. That's what it ultimately is. This isn't something you're designed to do all alone in your just normal human way of thinking about the world around you. But Jesus said to go for it, to do it, to think differently. And guess what? Maybe you just can. The next time it feels like someone's really not being very friendly, just try to think about it a little differently like Jesus did here. Try to look at it a little differently. Maybe just when there's not love, try to bring some love to the conversation, to the lunch table, to the basketball court, to the skate park. It's amazing what happens when one stands up in this world like Jesus asked us to, when we're his followers, asked us to, and all of a sudden it can have a ripple effect. The room changes, the friendship group changes, the skate park changes. And that's what Jesus is asking us to do. And let's try one more. Are you ready? Are you all still with me? Here we go. Okay. Here's a challenging one, as if the ones I just gave weren't challenging enough. Ready? Do not be anxious. Therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. Do not worry, in other words. Do not worry what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? How many of you have worried just at least a little before? How many of you remember the whole thing of the world shutting down a few years ago? Does anyone remember this? Is it just me who lived through the whole COVID thing? Does anyone remember where it was all of a sudden school on videos, and all of a sudden we're hearing that everyone's going to get sick, and there are all these people who are just not doing well? How many of you have heard of this? Do you remember this? How many of you, even if for just a little bit, or maybe for a lot of it, worried? Have you ever heard of the word worry? How many of you worried just a little bit during that time? I know it sounds crazy, but Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, said, do not worry. Jesus' follower, do not worry, disciple. Does this sound super, super easy when the entire world seems to be falling apart around you? Does that seem like something easy to do? Of course not. But is it easy to love those who very on purpose do not love you? Is that easy? Is it easy to all of a sudden in a group of a bunch of fighting people who are angry at each other and have all of these issues with the other to bring peace into the room? Is it easy? That's not super easy. That's actually really difficult. All you have to do is talk with your parents at some point in their life. I guarantee if you haven't had a time where you fought with people and tried to bring peace, then your parents at some point have had just this story to work through, to deal with, to figure out. Jesus calls us to bring peace where there is no peace, to bring love where there is not love, at least not clear love, to change the story. We know why we do it. We come alive when we have Jesus' love flowing through us. We're alive, we're active, we're exactly what we're designed to be, in a relationship with the Father. We were designed to have a strong foundation, but on this earth, it's not always easy to just do what God is calling us to do. But guess what? There's a great deal of hope. It's a good word for the room we're standing in. Jesus made it very clear, after saying all these hard things, bringing peace, bringing love, turning over hurt, making it new, making it better. He said the wise man builds his house on the rock. And when all of these things, all these hard things that are almost impossible, seemingly impossible to do on our own, when we have the wisdom Jesus is talking about here, it becomes possible through him. But here's the deal. The only way to have a relationship with someone, the only way to have a good friendship with someone, have you ever heard this? To have a friend, you need to be a friend. Have you heard this before? To have a friend, you need to be a friend. The only way to have a relationship with God the Father through Jesus is to actually have conversations, to actually know what God the Father is calling us to actually sit down and say, God, I don't have this all on my own. How can I have this through you? I know you've promised it to me. How can we make this actually happen? It is not possible to have a good relationship if you're not actually communicating. It's not possible to have a good relationship if you're not talking. It's not possible to have a good relationship if you're not giving something to the relationship. God calls us to a lot more through Jesus' words here than we would just do alone, on our own, as human beings, without his power flowing through us, without him flowing through us, without his love truly flowing through us. And the only way you have that good friendship is to be a friend with Jesus, to have a conversation with Jesus, to work on the friendship with Jesus, to read the Bible, to pray, to develop the friendship. So, I I couldn't be Mr. Parker without bringing in a little bit of my love for the circus arts. So, I'm going to ask a few questions here quickly though. How many of you believe that if you stepped into my shoes right now, I took my shoes off, they're probably pretty large for many of you. I took off my size 13s and you stepped into them, okay? And you said, you know what, Mr. Parker, how about you just watch what I'm about to do? I'm gonna grab the juggling knives, I'm gonna grab the unicycle, I'm gonna grab the juggling balls, and I will perform for you, Mr. Parker. How many of you believe that you would step onto the stage and awe everyone in the room with absolutely amazing juggling skills, unicycling skills, balancing skills from years and years of practice, if you hadn't had the practice? I betcha every honest answer in the room would say that is not going to happen. You do not step into amazing skateboarding, a strong foundation, a thriving business, a beautiful growing flower without having everything it needs and then some. You gotta have the foundation. You got to practice the juggling to be a juggler. You've got to practice the ladder balance to be a ladder balancer. You've got to practice the unicycle to be a unicyclist. Guess what? The same thing goes for our relationship with Jesus. We cannot have a foundation in Jesus without having a conversation with Jesus. Jesus is not our friend unless we're actually engaging in a friendship. It just does not work. If I were to ask one of you to take a juggling pin and balance it on your chin, and you've never tried it before, good luck. If I asked you to take 2 pins and balance them like that with no sticky tape in between, good luck. To know Jesus and to do what Jesus says means really, really knowing Jesus. So here is what we're gonna do. Let's try this. Let's do this. So I have a ladder over to the side behind this VW van. And in just a second, there may just be music queued up for a short performance. And we're gonna start with this ladder, but I have a feeling there may be a much taller ladder over to the side in just a second. So let's try this. How do you do what Jesus does and says? You become a real friend, a deep friend with Jesus by knowing what Jesus said and actually conversing, talking with, having a conversation with Jesus. To know how to juggle, unicycle, balance ladders, have a business that's successful, grow beautiful flowers, the foundation has to be there. So, let's try this. Okay, DJ Ethan, could we maybe possibly play a really upbeat, uplifting song? Okay, here we go. What should I start with? That works. Here we go. Okay. Precursor to 5. Here we go. Let's try one more time. Okay, let's do the